Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon in Boston. Good evening in Athens, or that's where some of our participants are. It's with a great pleasure that this sort of like roundtable discussion is assembled here, which is sort of like the constituent parts of this seminar that we have done for the third year in a row. It's the Georgia Danis seminar in security and diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we have been very, very fortunate, the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies, to join forces with the Karamanlis Chair at the Fletcher School and the Institute of International Relations in Athens, and the American College of Greece, and the Global Affairs Institute that has also sponsored this event. And this is an event that started out about the beginning of the pandemic in June of 2020. We did our very first one to embrace the changing environment and use Zoom as a way to capture what's going on, and instead of just pushing off the status quo, we sort of embraced it. And I like to emphasize that because I think we are in this dynamic space that's called the Eastern Mediterranean, but a dynamic system which changes constantly. As we are coming up to, we just passed the 1 year mark of this latest of incursion of Russia into the sovereign space of Ukraine. And in the last 3 years, we've sort of established this seminar as a winter intersession seminar. This year, we pushed it off to the end of February. And the idea, again, is to sort of look and cast the Mediterranean or the Eastern Mediterranean from that kind of a geopolitical perspective, and be emphatic about the term Eastern Mediterranean, instead of just lumping it together with the political MENA region, or looking at it in a context of some other. It's an attempt by us to define our region. So we have been fortunate enough to bring academics, policymakers, and diplomats and practitioners from 9 different countries in the region. Engage students from 9 different countries, including here in the United States, and provide this, bi-coastal perspective, bi-coastal from this side of the Atlantic and that side of the Atlantic. So for that, I think it has been a great success, and hopefully we'll move it forward. In this past week, we started out with this idea of resurgent nationalism, and this was, a working title when we started out, and sort of framing our discussions. And the resurgent part got quotations around it early on Monday, when Professor Milonas, in his presentation, said, well, maybe it's always been there. It's not necessarily resurgent. Maybe it's like an issue of perspective. So throughout the week, we have been moving in the region in different ways. So on Tuesday, we began a process of looking at different countries and different areas. On Tuesday, we had a couple of presentations that dealt with Turkey, Professor Erdemir talking about the 3-in-1 and the spillovers, and how does that really affect Turkey's foreign policy and what's going on in the region, how the outside affects the inside, in a sense, or the conundrum that is Cyprus. And very quickly this week, we sort of look at things like, issues of interests versus values. And even on Wednesday, the panels on Wednesday that had to do with Libya, or the panel on the Balkans, I think, was also illustrative of this. What can we practically get done? And it really gave it to focus on Thursday, when Ambassador Aviram really clearly said, well, if you look at American foreign policy and you're looking at Republican or Democrat, it doesn't really matter very much. It's still like a debate between interests versus values, whether you're talking about Obama in Cairo or the Abraham Accords, that it's pushed by the Trump administration. It's a playoff on that. And even somebody like Rami Khouri yesterday, we're talking from a Lebanese perspective, and said, okay, maybe it's time that we see what's practical. And this morning, even the Russos and Oris, who discussed from different perspectives the region, one from revolution and the other one from post earthquake diplomacy, it comes down to the practicality of it. Should you be worried about geopolitics when you can't really build buildings that safeguard the lives of people? Are you tolerant of what's going on in Tunisia, even though you are aiming for an Arab Spring? So this issue of governance became sort of what has distilled. And as I said, even before the panel began, the big elephant in the room is what's going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, this is just, I called it the latest incursion because most of us, all of us agree that this is something that has been going on for some time. And, whether we have ignored it in 2014 or 2008 or 2006, the pipeline turn off in the middle of winter by Russia, it has been this low level conflict. And now everybody's pretty much, the covering is off. Everybody's in the way that they are presenting themselves. So that's what we've tried to do this week. And, I have this screen in front of me that looks more like the Brady Bunch screen. So I will go through that process and move around and call on the partners in all of this to really give them a few minutes to present their point of view, and then maybe open it up to a nice discussion and wrap things up for us in this seminar. So first, I want to welcome Professor Pasarji to the Fletcher School and to this group. And this is like a continuation of what her predecessor and I, we put together, Professor Arvanitopoulos, and unfortunately he's not with us, but Professor Pasarji, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Vamvakas, Petros, and I do thank the Institute for Mediterranean Studies for this invitation. It's true that the Karamanlis chair, which I have taken over just very recently, has been working with Petros Vamvakas in organizing these seminars. So I'm happy to be with you all, and we'll take the continuation from Konstantinos Arvanitopoulos, who has organized this. So thank you for having me. You wanted us to make a few comments, and I will just try to make a few from my perspective. It's my personal perspective, and from following especially Greek-Turkish relations in the past few years. So I was very impressed this morning to hear Bosotiris Roussos and Dr. Ile Ors, especially Dr. Ile Ors on what she called terms the earthquake diplomacy. But the analysis that she made went a lot further than that and actually covered two earthquakes, which we maybe have forgotten. But I would like to make a few remarks on generally what I view as the issues that have to do specifically in the region with the Greek-Turkish relations and how they might affect or be affected by what is happening in the larger region. So, I mean, we all know that relations between Greece and Turkey have been very tense, especially in the last few years. Ile Ors reminded us that in the late 1990s, there was a rapprochement. And this rapprochement in the 2000s was also not only cultural and, like she said, in many fields, but also with the beginning of the exploratory talks between Greece and Turkey on the maritime zones. And I have to say that 1999, 2001, 2011, 2015, 2020, 23, I mean, we are talking now about a period of time. And like I tell my students often, time is in the international law can be very, very crucial. Take one example. When the initial and perhaps the only, according to some, dispute between Greece and Turkey is that of the delimitation of the continental shelf. And that was the issue in the late 1990s, early 2000, and even since 1974. Now, this issue had to do with the geographical space of what we call the Aegean proper, the Aegean Sea. And as time has passed, we have seen a few things happening. First of all, it has grown to encompass not only the issue of the delimitation of the continental shelf, but it has also turned into a big discussion and dialogue concerning the exclusive economic zone. We've heard a lot in Greek media in the past years, since 2010, 2012. And I have to say that having taken part in the exploratory talks for a while, this was not an issue that was initially on the table. Of course, law changes. It was because the exclusive economic zone was not something that had been that much practiced in the law of the sea. It happened after the Convention of the Law of the Sea. Since then, though, we have had this more recent type of new maritime diplomacy by Turkey, which is termed the Blue Homeland, which is really focused towards all maritime zones, be it in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean, all encompassing the whole, encompassing Turkey. And this has, opened many new fields of tension. We all lived through what the crises that took place, that occurred especially from 2016 on. And I have to say that at that point, the exploratory talk stopped. And especially this new, well, for some probably not new, not so new, let me put it that way, but quite aggressive, I would say, policy by on the part of the the government of Turkey, which was, of course, a response had to be given by the Greek side as well. Petros, if I'm talking too long, you just stop me. But I've been thinking for a few hours, so
that's fine. That's what we want.
So this is just coming out from what I've heard the past just couple days. And of course, the Greek side has to respond to these correctly. It has to respond, and this has created an escalation, which is, in my humble opinion, and in my personal opinion, again, quite unfortunate. And this has led to an opening of areas of dispute or areas of contestation, especially from the part of our neighbor, to cover other issues. And recently it's covered issues that have to do with sovereignty and with borders. You were discussing that, Petros, with other colleagues these past couple of days, with other states in the region. And all of a sudden, we have this resurgence of, I don't know, the Lausanne Treaty and everything. So, this has been expanding. It has made discussions, even any form of communication, very difficult. And it has been, of course, completed, I have to say, with some, I won't go as far as saying a cannonball diplomacy, but, all these all this movement in the air, which fortunately stopped right after the earthquake, which was a terrifying event, which has touched us all. I have to say that it was a tragic event that no one hopes for anyone. But what happened in the few days after this event was, we noticed, and I think Ile just really talked about it and presented it in a fashion that I couldn't, that there was some form of rapprochement of the peoples, because we had Greeks going over, and this has happened, of course, in 1999 and 2000, when, again, Turks had come over during the earthquake in Athens, in our region. I remember that. And, but Ile is quite, she ended in an optimistic note. And of course, there's two ways of looking at things, both in a pessimistic way and an optimistic way. And my remarks to this is, if we want to look at this in an optimistic way, we have to take into consideration that there are two sides to a coin. And there are two players. And this, will have to be fleshed out and discussed by the two players. Whether the current conjecture is the right one, I don't know, because we have elections in both countries, both Greece and Turkey. Whether this will be an entente for a long time, I'm not sure. I hesitate to say so, because I think we've had some very recently, the past couple of days, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps Konstantinos knows, some movement again in the air or in the sea. But what I wanted to stress was that, we need to, unless both sides want to resolve disputes between them, disputes will not be able to be resolved. And there are many ways we can look at it going forward. There can be discussions on specific issues. I heard just before some talking about, what is happening. I mean, all these forms of cooperation, cultural, any forms. But we need to see whether maybe starting with issues that are less hot, try to see if both sides are willing to make steps, each side towards the other, in order to see how, these seas can become seas of peaceful coexistence, rather than seas of animosity and enmity. These are my very few comments. Sorry for taking up your time.
No.
But it brought back quite a few memories of what I have also seen in the diplomacy of Greece and Turkey. So thank you very much, Petros.
Thank you. Quite the contrary. I think all the comments are more than welcomed, and I think it's and especially the positive assessment. And you said the word diplomacy, so I have to go to our diplomat in resident, Ambassador Garcevic, who again, he's been ambassador to Yugoslavia, to Serbia and Montenegro, and also an ambassador that has found himself in multiple European cities representing his country, even like his country's entrance into NATO, which is sort of like in the forefront again. And we're very, very fortunate to have him with us for the last few years, and as a colleague and a friend. And so Vesco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Petros. Thank you for, first of all, inviting me to be part of this panel and to share my thoughts with August, a group of people. Therefore, I will how to say, I will try to come back to the beginning of our seminar, which there is a saying in my country that goes, if you want to drink clean water, you have to go to the source. So then I will make a couple of comments about nationalism per se, how I see it is, and then maybe a few more comments about what's going on in the Balkans and how this is correlated. So since I joined, as you mentioned, joined Yugoslav service, and I was born and grew up in Yugoslavia, a socialist country, allow me to begin with by paraphrasing Marx, that nationalism is the opiate of the masses. So it comforts, nations after losses that come as a result of wrong policies, and thus leaving those policies unaddressed or unaddressed in a proper critical way. So it blurs the lines between the real and mythology, and often, if not always, creates, let's say, memories about events in the past, and with them replicates historical facts. In having two actually main goals: first of all, to weaponize the idea of the nation, people who belong to that nation, and to homogenize the group of people for political purposes. I'm saying all these things because I think that this is what's going on in the Balkans for some time, and is very topical these days. As we discussed in our panel, nationalism is on the rise in the Balkans region, and it's the result of a number of factors. First of all, how past is addressed and how countries see the past, not just what happened during the breakup of Yugoslavia, but also what was going on in the World War II. So cursory look at the region will tell us that far-right political ideology and narratives of hatred that caused bloody wars in Yugoslavia are very popular nowadays. They dominate public discourse. They've become actually official policies in some countries. I would say they are even more dangerous than 10 or 15 years ago. Though we may not have war as we used to have, they may make a lasting impact on societies. And by doing so, in fact, they will become regressive and impede the nation's progress. The fact that most of the countries in the region, those who are not members of European Union, are stuck in the process and don't progress well, is the result of nationalism, among others, in my view. Though as you know very well, we have discussed this many times, two of us, and in the panels, I'm very critical about the European Union, but let me be here critical about regions that I come from. So it appears in different forms, but all these appearances or forms, or call it as you like, avatars, they are very much interconnected. It appears in a form of national extremism, where we actually see enemies outside of all nations, but also we see enemies within all nations, something which was discussed also the first day, I would say, and Harris Milonas said that, this identifies the fifth column within its nation, and the fifth column is often civil society, opposition leaders, or moderate individuals who are lacking, let's say, national consciousness, and therefore are targeted by nationalism and extremism. Also, becomes intolerant towards others, and then I would say dehumanization and dominates public sphere and public discourse in countries, and I would say also media play an important role by spreading information or reporting in a way that legitimates hatred, xenophobia, and violence, and that is also supported sometimes overtly or sometimes tacitly with people who are in the government. So I don't know. I would say that I'm not so optimistic when it comes to my region and the development, at least in the foreseeable future. What makes difference between now and before is that if we compare this time with a first decade of 21st century and the time that followed Thessaloniki agenda, and I call this time of optimism, enthusiasm for European Union membership, is a really heavy involvement, political involvement of Brussels of Brussels, first of all, which is lacking nowadays as a corrective factor. So then, and then also a growing influence of ideas which we caused also the war in Ukraine, very popular ideas about this type of so orthodox conservatism and nationalism, and particularly in countries like Serbia, to some extent Bulgaria, and so on. So I don't want to discuss to go deeper into it, but I'm definitely at disposal to elaborate in more detail each of these points. I also don't want to be blamed. Don't kill a messenger for my maybe pessimistic view on what's going on in the region, but simply it may come also from if I want to address this from a more important but maybe less academic point of view, as somebody who is from that part of the world, an individual who actually believed in the process when process was launched at the beginning of 21st century. And we actually put behind at one point something which was happening in the 90s, So from that perspective, as an individual who trusted that, believed it, I'm a bit disappointed, if not more than a bit disappointed, when I see that the revival of trends and tendencies and narratives and policies that actually dominated and marked an era which is not known for good in all parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Vesco. And I wouldn't say pessimistic. I think it's more like a practical kind of a view. And I mean, here we are 20 years almost to the day of like the Thessaloniki agreement, like, where, and I think like in some ways, it's just like it cuts both ways as far as like, in the post-Maastricht period, like, the first 10, 50, 20 years is like, positive, and then like all the issues come up and it's like, you have like this, you thinking that plan A is going to work, and then there's all kinds of plan B, and the alphabet is long, whether it's the Cyrillic or the Greek or the Latin alphabet. But a person that has knows this structure very well and who has worked in and out of international organizations and in practice, I met some time ago in Brussels, and when she was in NATO for about 20 years, and now she's the executive director of EDIS in Athens, and somebody who really provided a great deal of insight in the panel on Wednesday morning with another great friend and colleague, Dimitris Tsarouchas. So, it's great to have you back and, and share your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Petros. This was a very interesting seminar again, and I'm glad that I took part. And just allow me on this occasion to congratulate Mr. Danis for the initiative to support this seminar. This is very important, I think. And let's hope that in summer we will have all the opportunity to meet in person and prolong this discussion, maybe to find some tangible solutions if we can. Also, I would like to warmly greet Professor Pazardzis, who was appointed chair, Karamanlis chair. And I mean, forgive me if I made a discrimination, let's say, against you men, but it's the first woman in this position, and I think we should be glad about that. Anyway, so let me try to put together some concluding remarks following the very interesting discussion we had 2 days ago. I also tend to be realistically pessimistic, let's say, as Vasco said, because, for many years we watch the problems without providing solutions. And this is a turning point for the Euro-Atlantic and the European institutions, in the sense that, and forgive me, Ambassador, to say so, okay, the Balkans we can put aside, okay, and wait. All right, put them at the corner and wait. And now we have the big issue, Ukraine and Russia. And we cannot put them aside. And so, I mean, it's just, entering the room like an elephant in a China shop, and we have to do something. And this is the biggest ever crisis, added to multiple crises already going on in this part of the world. So, if you ask me what alarms me more since before yesterday, after we had the discussion, in fact, is that we see a rather dynamic intervention of China in the conflict. If, it's not rhetorical, if they mean it. And knowing the mentality of the Chinese, they rather mean it. And if we have, because we are looking for a solution, if we have a solution backed by, from one side, US and European Union behind Ukraine, and then you have China behind Russia, then we have to admit, especially you, because I am only a humble former journalist, let's say, but you are the specialist of international law and international relations, then we have a new bipolarity, but a hybrid bipolarity, okay? Because we are ignorant where, I mean, what the Chinese grand strategy would be. And on the other hand, Russia only accepts China as backer, let's say. So we have to follow this. I mean, how it evolves, if in fact leads to any kind of negotiation or whatever. I am agnostic regarding what I would like to see more coming out of the war. A protracted conflict or a solution found through a big US-Chinese deal, let's say. This is something, I mean, I have no answer, and I don't think anybody has, not only around this table. So this is one thing. Another, let's say, I just put, you know, thoughts on the table. If we are asking Russia and Ukraine to sit down and talk, I mean, how we can refuse Greece and Turkey to talk, or other countries in the area? So if we are in favor of talks, then we have to accept talks for everybody. Okay. Otherwise, we see when we don't have negotiations, we may have war. So this is an extreme scenario. I never believed in a war between Greece and Turkey because of NATO, anyway. But certainly, I mean, things have changed on the Turkish side. We have to wait the elections for sure. We don't know what the outcome will be, but whatever the outcome, I think that Turkey has changed and they are not going to go to the status quo ante. And anyway, status quo ante, I mean, before the blue homeland, before the Eurasianist ambition and so on. Because Turkey is a very divided country, cut in two, I would say, and we can anticipate that the elections would be very tight. If we have a very tight election with, let's say, 51, 49, something like that, I don't think that anybody would make any radical shift. So we have to think about our red lines, and our red line, we in Greece, I mean, and Cyprus with the new presidency. And I don't know what our interlocutors around the Zoom think about, but I mean, our red lines cannot be that we don't have any issue to solve with Turkey. I speak Chatham House rules, but if we are in favor of a solution, we cannot go to find a solution if, I mean, we say that it's zero problems on our side and all the blame is to the other side. So we have to make some kind of self-criticism, or to find a consensus between the political forces in Greece. It's not obvious in a pre-electoral period, but it can come out after the elections, especially if we have a coalition government. Maybe it would be easier. I'm not advocating in favor of abandoning national interests or whatever, but it has been decades since these problems arose. If we don't solve the problems, then the problems will solve by themselves. Otherwise, just the last comment, I don't want to be very long. As we discussed during our session, I mean, NATO and the EU also have to do their homework and come out with solutions that can apply to this region as well, especially because the Middle East is in shambles and because Africa is coming with a lot of problems, I mean, to meet us. So, and we are not talking about Middle East and Africa at all because of Ukraine, but the problems are there. Thank you again for this initiative.
Sorry. Thank you. I mean, and thank everybody for this. And I agree with especially the last couple of points. I mean, I think to make the emphasis of like, the issue of perspective. And one of the things that even like from the institute perspective, it's just a matter of like recasting the region and seeing the region not just a frontier, but also like as a pivot area that connects Africa and Asia and Europe together in a different ways, and like, in dimensions that we don't necessarily see. I mean, Rami Khouri yesterday mentioned that the Arab world right now is about 440 million people. And I don't think, we ever conceptualize what that means. We talk about 400 plus million people in Europe. We talk about 330 million US. We never like say 440 million in the Arab world, not as a threat point, but like, the demographics and the framing of it is also very important. And I think a person that has done a really nice job consistently reshaping the region, or like recasting the region in his work is Konstantinos Filis, and the work that he's done over the years. We met some time ago, I think almost a decade ago in Tinos for the first time. And ever since then, I really appreciate his input, and I'm very, very happy that, American College of Greece and his Global Affairs Institute is part of this effort. So Konstantinos, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Petros, thank you. Thanks for the warm words. It's always a pleasure and an honor to join you at your initiatives. I would like to thank, of course, Mr. Danis for his precious support. And I would like to thank the previous speakers, because they facilitated my work to the best possible extent. So I am only going to add a couple of comments, starting with Greece. It seems to me that since 2009, 2010, because of the breakup of ties between Turkey, Israel, and Egypt, this was considered as a triangle that was promoting and securing US interests in the region after 1979. So for almost 30 years, this triangular relationship was of great importance to the Americans. We stepped in 2010, starting with Israel, from an accidental meeting between George Papandreou and Benjamin Netanyahu in Moscow. And then all Greek consecutive governments paid emphasis on Greece's repositioning in the Eastern Mediterranean, if we were ever positioned before in this area. Our priority was the Balkans, and in my mind, we have discussed about that with Petros, and I agree with the ambassador. There is a connection between the Balkans with the Eastern Mediterranean. We should not disconnect these two areas. On the contrary, they face common challenges. But I agree that in the case of the Balkans, the fact that the problems have been hidden under the carpet for many years, plus the fact that, as the ambassador spoke about nationalism, I would add that with the exception of Greece, the irredentist aspirations of all other Balkan countries have not been materialized, namely Bulgaria, Serbia, Albania. So we are the only ones that have been lucky in that respect, especially in the two Balkan wars, and of course what followed World War II. Going back to the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, as I said, repositioned itself or stepped in to exploit the worsening of relations between Turkey, Israel, and Egypt. That was a wise move on our behalf. However, we're talking about the elephants in the room. And in the case of Eastern Mediterranean, one of the elephants in the room is obviously Turkey. Turkey is too big to be excluded from regional developments. And actually, it has never been the case on our behalf, at least, I can guarantee that, on Greece's part, to isolate or marginalize Turkey from regional affairs. On the opposite, it was Turkey that decided to kind of self-isolate from regional affairs, given the deterioration of its ties, of its relations, both with Israel and Egypt, the fact that it invested so much, I mean, Erdogan, in his relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, which, of course, made him a persona non grata for President al-Sisi in Egypt. The fact that he invested in his relations with the Palestinians and to be the, let's say, protector of Palestinian rights, but of Sunni Muslim rights all over the world, that brought him in direct conflict with Israel. He has called the Israeli state a terrorist state in the past. And I keep listening to my Turkish friends saying that the Turkish-Libyan memorandum, which of course is null and void, there is no question about that, and illegal, Professor Pazarji can verify that, she's the expert, that move on Turkey's behalf was a reaction to the feeling, to the impression that Turkey was being marginalized in the Eastern Mediterranean with Greek Cypriot responsibility. Well, I think that they are overestimating our role. I mean, we can define to a certain extent the course of events in the Eastern Mediterranean, but not to that extent. So it has been Turkey to blame and not Greece for what happened during the last decade. But going back or adding to what Ino said about talks, and I fully subscribe to the fact that we cannot ask others to talk with each other, even Ukraine with Russia, and deny talks in our case. I fully agree with that. However, I would only have one comment, and I'm going to close my remarks with that comment. Any talks between Greece and Turkey should have a very specific framework. We cannot, I mean, exploratory talks. Professor Pazarji described them, she was part of them. After 2021, when they resumed, there was no substance. There were two parallel monologues. There was no substance at all. We know it. The Turks knew it as well. So it was more a game or part of a narrative that was addressed mainly to the West rather than something substantial. So in that sense, my suggestion is that Greece can put a roadmap on the table, setting out in detail the steps initially towards de-escalation, because we are there, but de-escalation has not consolidated. So first should be de-escalation, then we should work towards consolidation, which can include cooperation on low policy issues of climate or relative trust, before the definite step of launching a dialogue within a specific framework based on international law and the binding time frame for settlement and or recourse to The Hague. That resembles to Helsinki process. Of course, Helsinki is dead, fortunately or unfortunately, but 20 plus years, 23 years after Helsinki, we might have to adapt, of course, this situation to a new Helsinki. The new and harsh reality for Turkey after the dramatic earthquakes is obliging or should oblige Ankara to adapt. And we, on our part, await for tangible proof as a prerequisite for relaunching talks. And we also need to bear in mind, Petros, and I'm going to close with that, notwithstanding the earthquakes, that Turkey remains a revisionist state. The Turkey-Libya agreement remains in force. The linking of demilitarization and sovereignty remains on the table. So instead of adding on, this discussion things, maybe we should start thinking of how we can remove issues from this upcoming dialogue if it happens after the elections. And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, I cannot recall a similar time in momentum when both sides, both states had elections at the same time, which means that we will have two governments, maybe the same leaders, maybe other leaders, who knows, the electorate will tell, starting on the very same month, their new term, which might prove positive if there is political will. So that's it from me. Thanks. I hope I was on time.
There's no, more than that, I think you also provided not only the framing, but you provided some solid steps. And I couldn't agree more with even your last comment about revisionism. And, I think what, one of the things that it's hovering with all of us is the fact that revisionism is becoming a lot stronger, especially with what might happen in Ukraine either way. And there is that discussion whether you want the war to be over kind of a thing, and what are the plausible things. And that also fuels that, because you're absolutely right. Turkey is in Syria right now, so it is that. So there's nothing that's that we have to expect, but it's just like moving back to it. And before I give a chance to everybody to reach sort of go back and sort of like a second points or thoughts. It's been too long for me to to stop Mr. Danis from making his comments, and I think he's eager to do so. So I think we owe it to him, and I like everybody said, very grateful for his support, and he's sort of like his energy and drive, and his drive to find solutions. So, Mr. Danis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Vamvakas, Petros. Thank you very much, all of you participating. Yes, I am looking for solutions. All my life solution is the only way, and removing some of the negative and things that we are hashing over and over again across the globe. It is the problems that creates the divisiveness and the catastrophic outcomes that we see now with Russia and invading Ukraine. It's really for me, there's an objective and is that solutions you can find if you want to, and that will only come from the leadership, and because the leadership is who directs the public, and sometimes through pressure, whether it's Russia or through dictatorship in some areas, but the negotiating part is the only solution. The interests and values, as Professor Vamvakas pointed out, as around us, all over the globe, all over the human behavior. And so nationalism is one of the things that it's been continuously taken over up and down. It depends on the types of difficulties that exist among nations and neighbors and what have you. The geopolitical is another area. Right now, we're having a situation that Russia was pushed, perhaps some extent, historically, with NATO expansion in Eastern Europe and circling Russia around their borders. Now, should that have been an action that they taken and bringing almost a third world war into some horizon? And so those are the things that our leaders at the democratic side of it, so-called the democrats that we believe, should have been looked at it and looked at the negotiating process in non-aggressive treaties and so forth. So, and of course, China right now is getting pressure by the U.S. Or U.S. is pressuring China for taking over the geopolitical management or geopolitical oversight of the East and of the Far East. So it's going to be acting as they already do. I think Professor Despina pointed out the biggest problem right now, it is, I believe, Russia, Ukraine, European, the US, European Union, and now China is really becoming more vocal into that situation. So that is the areas of that has been occurring, obviously pointed out on the why is Turkey not been behaving appropriately, and it hasn't been for a long period of time. But how do we find solutions? How can we convince the leaders of these nations to find a common ground negotiating rather than exposing a possible war catastrophe? And obviously, a lot of the interest is and survival is our climate problem that we can see that's how it's brewing up in every area. You can see how the earthquake, a natural phenomenon and catastrophe, brought help and more and toning down that temperature that was taking place the last few months due to the internal political pressure and elections coming up. So with that, I guess I'm looking from all of you some kind of a solution negotiating to solve some of the serious problems that exist right now. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for the drive and the push forward. So I don't know if people have comments on what we've heard. We can go back and, you know, the way that we did it. We can give everybody a minute to thoughts and closing thoughts, kind of a thing. And then if there are any questions, I'll be happy to address them. But I don't want to tire the audience who's been through this marathon. You know, we call it a seminar. I call it a marathon. We did 16 presentations in 6 days. So I think I tip my hat to everybody for sort of going on this crazy pace. I know some of you are athletes on this panel, you know, so I appreciate it.
I do want to thank Professor Vamvakas and all of you, especially Professor Vamvakas, planning all this time throughout the years. And that's why I'm doing whatever I can to help and support his efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. So Professor Pazarji, first to you, if you want to have any comments on what you've heard or, you know, closing thoughts.
Well, I think this was an extremely interesting discussion. And I think the final question, Mr. Danis has put it, and I think we've all have been asking ourselves for many years now, how do we resolve it? Mr. Danis is asking for practical solutions. He's given the solution himself by saying it's negotiating. There will have to be some negotiations. And I think both my colleagues, all my colleagues here, both Ino, who I greet, and Konstantinos have sort of brought, said how perhaps both sides could be brought to a negotiating table. Of course, Konstantinos is right, and then once you go into negotiations proper, the way back is difficult. And setting the scene beforehand will be as important as the negotiations themselves for me. I see him nodding, and I'm glad he is, because sometimes I feel alone in this effort. So how to do it, I really don't know. I hope to see it in my lifetime. But I don't know the solutions. Perhaps Konstantinos will have a specific one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Petros. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Danis, and everyone for this. This was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Vesco.
What to say, not so much to add, but to echo what we have said so far. I would pick up, I don't want to comment on any particular issue or dispute, bilateral, including the Greek and Turkish dispute or situation in Ukraine. But I would like to just make a point about what you, Mr. Danis, has said. You have said that importance of leadership, but leadership is leaders with vision is something that we are lacking right now, and I would apply this almost to all sides involved in conflicts, not just these that we have mentioned, but some others. Which leaders with vision that implies also that we should not just pursue a maximal goal in every situation, which means if you want to sit at the table and looking for a negotiated solution, either in politics or in business, you know very well that, it rarely happens that you can get maximal goal as a result of it. So something which was mentioned before, if one want to be ready to negotiate or to create a positive, conducive atmosphere for negotiation, you have to make some gestures of goodwill at the beginning, just to build trust between sides and then begin negotiating. So I'm again coming back to my points, not a big optimist. When it comes to Ukraine, I think that this war is going to continue. I don't see that atmosphere created, and we have to wait until some time for that to happen. I think that both sides involved in conflict believe that their bargaining power is going to rise how time goes on, and therefore they wait for this time to come. At the end of the day, put for a moment yourself in shoes of Ukraine. If somebody have taken part of your territory, just imagine if Turkey has taken part of your few of your islands, and then accusing others for provoking their intervention, including you. So what would be then I would say a fair solution for that conflict? So very, very difficult. We are like a very complex situation, and it will take time. At least how I see. And for that, indeed, we need, as you mentioned, people with vision. Do we have them? That is a question. Yeah.
Thank you. To you.
Thank you all. Let me conclude. We have to agree between us Greeks, first of all, what direction we have to go. And it has not to be a choice between hawks and doves. We can be hawks and doves at the same time with the other part. It depends on the course of the process. My assumption is based on the observation, especially of the Cyprus issue, which is becoming worse and worse every year, because they deny any solution offered to them, the Cypriots. They risk now to end up with a partition, practically, official or not. For Greece, as I said, being a member of NATO, I I would not be afraid of having, let's say, territorial losses, but we have to agree as a political system, as society, where we would like to go. And if you watch the Greek television, listen to the radio, read the papers, you see that there is no maturity at all about, I mean, what the national strategy should be. And this is what I'm trying to say. Why? Because why? I mean, is there a momentum now? The momentum is because of the big crisis between the West and Russia, and it will change. I mean, the international relations and the regional balances. So let's, as I said, we have some time to watch the elections, both in Greece and Turkey, and then to hopefully, I mean, sit down and have a roadmap.
Thank you. Konstantin, last but not least, certainly, and I think it's amazing. Just a comment before you finish us up. I mean, that as I see the boxes, people are nodding their heads on this. And maybe it would take some academic courage for us to step forward and say, this is what we agree with, because each one of us feels this way in our own insular spaces, but in the public spaces, that conversation is missing, as Professor Pazarji mentioned. So, Konstantinos, the floor is yours.
Petros, thank you. And before I conclude, let me congratulate you once again for this project. It is signed by you. I mean, it has your signature all the way around. So I would like to congratulate you. And of course, once again, Mr. Danis, for his precious support. Geography is destiny. We cannot change it. Even if we hope for, we can do it. Which means that we are doomed to coexist and live with our neighbors, be it Turkey, Albania, North Macedonia, Egypt, etc. And there are common challenges. For me, the things that divide neighbors, that unite neighbors, are more than those that divide them. For instance, the climate crisis. We can have a plastic-free Mediterranean initiative that can go on. Nobody's going to lose. Yes, we haven't yet delimited our exclusive economic zone and continental shelf with Turkey, with Libya, Turkey with Egypt, Libya with Egypt, etc. There are so many pending issues still. There are challenges that if we do not confront them effectively as soon as possible, and climate crisis is one of them, Greek-Turkish relations, Ukraine and Russia, China and Taiwan, South Sudan and Sudan, Ethiopia and Egypt, they're, I mean, of secondary importance, to put it mildly. So there is a crisis, there is an ongoing crisis, and there are other actually common challenges. For instance, in migration, I don't know whether my two colleagues from Greece, or Greek colleagues actually, because Professor Pazarji is in the States right now, would agree with me. But in migration, I see that Greece has more things in common with Turkey than with the EU. There are more common interests between the two states in that respect, more common denominators, but we have to explore them. Also other issues like that of terrorism and the global terrorist network. Demographics, as you said, Petros, before, tell us not only the story, but tell us the future, predict the future in a way. So if we don't tackle the challenges jointly, I don't think that we can be effective and successful. And one last thing about energy. we keep discussing about energy being a catalyst of cooperation between the involved sides in the Eastern Mediterranean. Well, now the time has come, whether it's a catalyst for dialogue and negotiations and solutions, or for further conflict, now it's the time to decide. Because of the crisis in Ukraine and the determination on behalf of the EU, with the support of the US, there's no question about that, to lessen our dependence on Russian gas, which has been a plan even since the first crisis between Russia and Ukraine back in 2005, 2006. We are in 2023, and it was the war in Ukraine that forced us to realize what was happening, and also to realize that this policy that Germany followed vis-a-vis Russia of appeasement failed. I don't disagree necessarily with the logic that if we bind our interests and ties with Russia or with Turkey, this might make them less revisionist, not more democratic, but we can, you know, there can be common understanding with them, etc., etc. And the Germans invested in that, especially in energy, because they were receiving cheap or cheaper compared with other sources, Russian pipeline gas. But that policy of appeasement failed in Ukraine twice, and it failed in Georgia actually in 2008, as you said before. So there were too many failures. That's why we need to invest in common interests, but we need a framework at the same time. So to conclude, now we have to make a final decision, because we are running out of time, whether the Eastern Mediterranean can turn into a supplementary source for security of supply of the European market or not. If it's going to be one of the supplementary sources, not competitive to Russian gas in terms of quantities, but just a supplementary source, alternative, then we should work, not necessarily solve all our differences, but we definitely need to do something concrete. Otherwise, we will, lose the momentum, because as you do know, we are heading towards this green energy, green economy, green whatever. I am a fan of Panathinaikos, so I like green color. So we are heading towards cleaner forms of energy and all this stuff. Now there is a break, of course, because of Ukraine and because we need energy prices that we can handle. Still, if the Eastern Mediterranean does not fully exploit the current momentum because of Ukraine, especially in energy, be it natural gas, be it renewables, then I think that we're going to lose this opportunity for good. So after elections in Greece and Turkey, I predict, and we all know in this panel, that there are already some thoughts and ideas about hosting a conference for the Eastern Mediterranean with the inclusion of all parties. And in that respect, Petros, the problem will not be how the Turkish Cypriots will be labeled during discussions on whether Turkey will accept the Cypriots, the Greek Cypriots, as a state, since they have not recognized them. These are technicalities that the diplomats can solve just like that, providing that there is political will. So I fully agree with what Mr. Danis said. We need leadership, because leadership can solve issues and can persuade, based on what Ino said, can persuade the public opinion. Yes, the public discourse here in Greece is very problematic. I couldn't agree with you more. Can persuade the public opinion that by negotiating, by compromising, that does not entail that you are giving up national sovereign rights or something, anything similar to that. Negotiations and solutions presuppose compromises, compromises that will be viable. Compromise as a word has a very negative connotation here in Greece, and we can recall that because of the Prespa Agreement of 2018. The Prespa Agreement had some negative parts, of course, but to me was a breakthrough for an issue, the name issue, that was a burden for Greek foreign policy for 27 years. And besides that, the Americans started realizing, and the rest of the West, that Greece can really be part of the solution of the problems rather than being part of the problem itself. So that's it. Thank you.
What do you mean? That's it? I mean, you just opened up the whole can of like everything. So we start the seminar all over again. We'll go back to Monday and start all over here. Yes, I mean, I think that's, you finish us up with like an important point, because I mean, if the whole compromise and negotiation, it takes place outside of the very narrow nationalistic terms, because compromise is either between a patriot or a traitor. So like, that we've heard this 1,000 times, but the point is, the point of public opinion, and public opinion in democracies is very, very important, and who moves that public opinion around in social media. So I think you also need a sense of educating people to make sure that they understand that not only us, who are discussing this, they also understand that those things are not necessarily detrimental to their fundamental identity. If I have this idea of a compromise, and, we could talk about the Prespa Agreement and the safety of what it is today, but, there was the Annan Plan that really sort of like, going back to Ino's thing, like every year that goes by becomes a de facto partition on Cyprus. So I'm not going to prolong this any longer. I know you already stated your green allegiance, and I know like in about 12 minutes you have to like watch that. So just to liberate everyone, I want to thank all of you. I don't think I need any thanks, but I want to thank all of you for participating. And I think this is hopefully this is one little morsel of providing some understanding. And of course, Isaac, who's done a great job stepping forward the last month or so, and helping out at the Institute, and Mr. Danis and everybody, the Karamanlis chair, the American College of Greece, and Idis, of course, and each one of you individually. Thank you.